of handouts on the table back there that have this image of the process and also links to where you can find the petition, how you can submit public comments. So, and also my business card back there. So feel free to grab those on your way out. So on January 11th, 2024, we received a petition from Wild Fish Conservancy to list any or all ESUs in the Gulf of Alaska of Chinook salmon. I'll define ESU, evolutionarily significant unit, in just a little bit. So the first step, once we receive a petition, is we have 90 days to conduct a review. And at the 90-day review stage, we do not conduct additional research, and we do not solicit information from parties outside of the agency to assist in evaluating the petition. We are only allowed to use the information in the petition and what we have readily available in our files. John touched on the standard, the reasonable person standard, we call it, where we make our decision of a positive 90-day finding or a negative 90-day finding based on what we think a reasonable person, not an expert, would conclude from reading the petition. And there's two possible outcomes. A negative 90-day finding, had we made a negative 90-day finding, the process would have stopped there. With a positive 90-day finding, we conduct a status review. And we decided it was most prudent to make a positive 90-day finding and do a more thorough review informed by all of the best available scientific and traditional knowledge. It's really important to note, and I think John mentioned this also, that a positive 90-day finding does not mean that a species or population warrants listing. It just means that we will do a thorough status review to make a more informed assessment. So we're now at the public comment and status review phase. We have assembled a team of scientists, and we are grateful for the participation of scientists from Fish and Game to help us. We recognize that Fish and Game has a wealth of information to help us with this. And so we are embarking on a status review. Simultaneously, we have a public comment period where we are specifically requesting information to inform that status review. While it's nice to hear opinions, what we really want is data, information, traditional knowledge to make sure that we are touching on all of the important aspects that we need to consider in this review. Normally, the public comment period on a 90-day finding is 60 days at the request of Fish and Game and the North Pacific Fish Commission and North Pacific Fisheries Management Council and other organizations, and recognizing that this is busy summer season for everyone and unfortunate timing of when the public comment period happened, we extended that comment period until September 6th to give people more time to provide us input. We realize that's still not very much time for analysis of this scope, but we are under a very tight deadline. We have 12 months to complete the status review, and that's 12 months from when we received the petition, not from when we made our positive finding. And that means our status review is due in January of 2025. The status review team will prepare a status review report, and we make a 12-month finding. Similar to the 90-day finding, if we have a negative 12-month finding, the process stops there. If we have a positive or warranted 12-month finding, we will publish that along with a proposed rule to list one or more evolutionarily significant units as threatened or endangered. At that point, there would be another opportunity for tribal consultation and public comment, and the results of that round could be withdrawal of the proposed rule if new information came out that informed our decision and made us change our decision, or it could lead to a final rule to list the species. But again, we have no preconceptions about which way this status review is going to go. We are simply conducting the analysis now and hoping that will have a lot of public input and information submitted. Next slide, please.
Next slide. Thank you.
This shows, all of you are familiar with the Gulf of Alaska, but this just shows the extent of the area that we were petitioned to consider. It is vast. It is, I think, bigger than Oregon, Washington, California combined. So we've got an ambitious task ahead of us. Next slide. So a status review includes a comprehensive review of a species biology and ecology, an assessment of threats, of all threats, not just fishing, a demographic risk analysis, an analysis of overall extinction risk, and we also consider ongoing planned conservation efforts in our determinations. We're currently in this first two steps of this status review process, gathering information and identifying evolutionarily significant units. An ESU is a population of Pacific salmon that is substantially reproductively isolated from other populations and represents an important component of the evolutionary legacy of the species. You may be familiar with ESUs. Sometimes they're called distinct population segments. There's some listed ESUs and DPSs in the West Coast. We don't have any in Alaska. There are no listed salmonids or other fish in Alaska, and therefore we don't have ESUs established or designated. And this makes it hard, based on the petition, it's hard to assess the status of the population if you don't know where these subdivisions of the subpopulations exist. So our first step is to identify ESUs or subpopulations, and that is the appropriate scale to conduct the analysis of population trends and threats and extinction risk. For the status review, we use the best available data, which includes all sources of information: peer-reviewed literature, gray literature, personal communications, information submitted through the public comment period, traditional knowledge gained through formal consultations, but we are not required, nor do we have time, to conduct new research. The demographic risks analysis looks at abundance and trends, productivity, diversity, spatial distribution, and connectivity. And then we do an assessment of threats. And the threats include habitat destruction, overutilization, disease or predation, inadequacy of existing regulatory mechanisms, and other natural or human factors, including things such as commercial trawling, bycatch, ocean conditions, freshwater habitat destruction, pollution, and climate change. We'll consider all of those and any additional threats that are brought to our attention in our status review. So that's all I had prepared, and I'll pass it to Doug, and then we'll
actually, the format we have is we're having a conversation with Noah, and we'll finish up and then turn to the commissioner, if that's okay, Mr. Commissioner. I guess I have a couple questions, and you know, right now, while we have you, you know, a lot of this to us is tied to trawling and other things, and we're pretty concerned, Mr. Kurland, with, and very disappointed, quite honestly, in the Biden administration's rejection of Governor Inslee's appointments to the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council, and their decision to accept the status quo with their acceptance of Governor Dunleavy's appointments. And for those listening, the status quo is allowing for, over the course of the last 10 years, 141 million pounds of salmon, including nearly 17,000 of recorded king salmon, halibut, crab, sablefish, and other species per year, to be thrown overboard by the trawling industry within the Bering Sea and Gulf of Alaska. Mr. Kurland, for many years, Alaska tribes have made numerous and huge efforts for tribal representatives and nominations for the NPFMC, as well as the Federal Subsistence Board, can you please respond to the unanswered requests on federal forums related to fisheries?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So first of all, our agency has actually supported the request to add dedicated tribal seats to the North Pacific Fishery Management Council. There had been draft legislation to amend the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act to add.
Okay.
Thank you for speaking up. Sorry about that. There had been some legislation introduced in Congress to amend federal law, the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act, to add 2 dedicated tribal seats to the North Pacific Council. And our agency has supported that and actually testified in Congress in support of that. The way the law is currently written, there are no dedicated tribal seats. So the governors who make nominations for the Secretary of Commerce to appoint members to the council, governors may suggest a tribal representative. And our agency, actually, my boss, the head of the National Marine Fisheries Service, and the Secretary of Commerce both reached out to the state of Alaska and urged the state to consider nominations of qualified Alaska Native to sit on the council. And Governor Dunleavy did that. He nominated John Moeller to a seat on the council, and the secretary just recently appointed Mr. Moeller. The council also recently added a dedicated tribal seat on its advisory panel, which is an industry stakeholder advisory panel to the council that reviews all the fishery management measures, issues that come before the council and provides its advice. Those are a couple of steps moving in the direction that President Peterson raised. But, you know, again, our agency does support additional Alaska Native representation on the North Pacific Fishery Management Council. You also mentioned some statistics on bycatch, and I didn't catch all the facts and figures there, so I won't get into specifics other than to note that we take reduction of bycatch in commercial fisheries very, very seriously. And have been working with the North Pacific Council to minimize bycatch of halibut, of crabs, of salmon, other species of concern. There is an analysis that's currently underway to develop some new management measures to reduce chum salmon bycatch in the pollock trawl fisheries. And we're seeing good progress on that and look forward to seeing that come back before the council soon. So maybe I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you. You know, maybe you could speak to, you know, Tlingit and Haida, along with many other Alaska tribes and organizations, have been pushing for updates to the guidelines for the national standards under the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act. Can you provide an update on that process and the response to those requests?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the interest in those potential revisions to the national standards actually in large measure came from people in Alaska, noting that those particular 3 national standards dealing with allocations and communities and bycatch had not been updated in a long time. And for those who aren't familiar with it, under the Magnuson-Stevens Act, the federal law that governs fisheries in the U.S. exclusive economic zone, there are a set of 10 national standards that are kind of like the guiding principles that any management measures developed under that law need to adhere to. And there are some regulatory guidelines for interpreting those national standards that are in the statute. And so we had been approached, our agency had been approached to update the guidelines for 3 of those 10 national standards, which are the ones that I mentioned. We have been working on that for quite some time. We've had public comment periods. We have taken input through the regional fishery management councils and have been developing some proposed revisions to those 3 national standards that we had hoped we would be able to release by now, but they are still undergoing review. So I don't have a specific time frame to give you for when that's going to be out, but we're still hoping to do that. And that would be a proposal. And we would have an additional public comment period once that proposal is released. There would also be briefings for each of the regional fishery management councils, including the North Pacific Council, and opportunities for people to testify and provide input that way.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any questions from the audience before we move on to the commissioner? Mary?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So I'll just repeat it for those who may not have been able to hear. It was a question about what qualified candidates are for seats on the North Pacific Fishery Management Council. Under the Magnuson-Stevens Act, it's pretty broad, but there's a description of people who have relevant expertise, and that could include people who went to school for fisheries. It could include practical expertise or traditional knowledge, traditional experience related to management of the fisheries. So it's actually pretty broad, pretty encompassing. Fishery management councils across the country have had, of course, commercial fisheries representatives, recreational fisheries representatives, people who are indigenous knowledge holders, people who represent conservation organizations, people from academia. So there's a wide range of backgrounds that can qualify for participation on a council.
Just to follow up, thank you for answering that, but it's still a broad picture, and you brought in Magnuson-Stevens Act. And on that board, aren't they all Caucasian? And I don't see the backgrounds, or their pictures don't show backgrounds that they are qualified candidates to be serving on such a board, to be representing such a vast majority of who live this lifestyle. And I would like to say that the Alaska Native population throughout the whole state, we are stewards of this land and our waters and our air. So I don't understand, because it's not making sense of not having a tribal citizen, whether it's here in the Southeast or from up north, because we're all facing the facts that we don't have fish. And I haven't had king salmon, as a matter of fact, for quite a long time. And to not have my own foods to be served me, I'm getting quite cranky. And I'm ready to just bypass the state government relationship with me, because they're not listening. They have their own agendas as to how they think it should look and how they're going to take care of my needs and meeting my needs. So I'm so sorry you're here to get a whooping. But it's a big deal, and I still don't approve of what a qualified candidate to sit on the board. And I don't hear the arguments of with the governor who appoints of pleading the cause. So do you have that kind of dialogue going on with our governor when he starts appointing people that he thinks are qualified to become board members?
Yeah, thank you for the follow-up comment on that. And I hear the concern, and it's one that we have heard quite a lot. So a couple of different answers, I guess. First of all, what I was describing is the standards under federal law, which are very broad. But of course, that requires, at the level of each nomination, deciding on what's appropriate. The Secretary of Commerce, essentially my big boss, can only appoint from the list of nominees that's received from a governor. So for the Alaska voting seats, we got a slate of nominations from Governor Dunleavy. And I had some conversations with the commissioner, and my boss did as well. Again, encouraging nomination of Alaska Natives. And as I mentioned, John Moeller, who is an Aleut from, he lives in Juneau now, but He grew up in Unalaska and has worked in a lot of the state and has been involved in fisheries issues for a long time. He was just appointed and will be taking his seat in October. And as I indicated, my agency is very interested in seeing more diversity on the councils, not just Alaska Natives, but more women, more people of color, people from diverse backgrounds and types of experience. And we're trying to advance that for all of the 8 regional fishery management councils, not just the one here in Alaska.
Well, again, I want to thank you, Mr. Kurland and Ms. Sawyer, for joining us today. And I also want to formally request right here and right now that Clink and Haida have a tribal technical representative that assists NOAA in the review of this petition. Thank you. Before we move on to our commissioner, there's a short video they want to play. We like our videos.
It's just an amazing feeling to have that gaff hook in your hand and pulling that fish into the boat and conking it on its head and bringing it aboard and hearing that thud when it hits the deck. Fishermen have tremendous respect for this resource. I'm a 2nd generation commercial fisherman. I was born and raised in Craig, Alaska, and I grew up on the back deck of a power trawler. It's been a great experience. It's made me who I am today.
I'm a 3rd generation fisherman. I grew up on the back deck throughout the summers when I was a little kid. So I started probably delivering fish and cleaning fish when I was probably 7, 8 years old, and then just worked my way up gradually through summer to summer, developing my skills. Probably about half of my income for the summer is off the 2 king openers.
I feel like trawlers were so concerned about king salmon stocks, and it's very, very important to us. I just think we can all work together and try to find a better solution.
Well, I'm pleased to welcome our Commissioner of Fish and Game, Mr. Doug Vincent Lang, and I'll turn it over to him to introduce himself and give some comments.
Well, first off, thank you for inviting me to participate in this event. It's good to be around friends and it's good to talk about these issues. First off, I want you to all understand that we at Fish and Game understand the importance of fishing to Southeast Alaska. It's part of our culture, part of our communities, to our tribes, to our residents, and to our visitors, and really to our economy and food security. We don't underestimate the value of fishing to Southeast Alaska. You know, and it's really the glue that's holding many of our communities together right now. You know, logging used to hold it together in a lot of different ways, but really fishing is that glue right now that holds it together. And we have a significant decline in fishing. We're going to see communities dry up. We're going to see schools close, and that's not something that we want to see moving forward. At ADF&G, we are committed to ensuring that fishing remains a sustainable part of Southeast Alaska into the future. And while we, like the president said, we may disagree on some issues, I think we can remain united in our desire to ensure that fishing remains a sustainable part of the future of Southeast Alaska moving forward. A little bit about the role that I play as the Commissioner of Fish and Game. I lead the Department of Fish and Game in that, you know, we manage all the commercial, sport, subsistence, and personal use fisheries all throughout the state, including Southeast Alaska. We manage almost all of the game and wildlife populations. We have our Title 16 Habitat Permitting Authority, which basically assures that we're going to have habitat into the future. We make sure that as Commissioner of Fish and Game, I am one of the only commissioners or head of a fish and game agency in the nation that can actually stop a project to ensure that fish passage and fish habitat is sustained for future generations. That's a pretty amazing authority for a fish and game commissioner to hold. We also have a subsistence research section, and that section now has been re-promoted back up to a division, and we'll be hiring a division director for that in the next several months. But that section really provides the information that's needed by the regulatory boards to ensure that subsistence needs are being met across the state. I also want to note that we also provide support to the Alaska Board of Fisheries and Board of Game. And there's really an important meeting coming up in Ketchikan. I think it's in December. No, it's in January, February part. And that is where we're going to decide the king salmon allocation plan moving forward. So I urge everybody that has an interest in coming down and participating in that meeting in Ketchikan. I also serve as the U.S. Salmon Commissioner on the Pacific Salmon Treaty, and also as the chair of the Northern Fund, which is a major funding source for a lot of salmon research that goes on throughout British Columbia and Southeast Alaska. I also serve on the North Pacific Fishery Management Council. I've delegated my seat to one of my deputies, Rachel Baker, but we really do a lot of work in setting the agenda for the council moving forward. Alaska's got 6 voting seats, which is a majority on that council, and we try to ensure that we're doing the right thing for Alaska in those areas. I also serve on the North Pacific Anadromous Fish Commission. That is a group that looks at the high seas salmon fisheries questions. We just finished with the International Year of the Salmon, and now we're moving into Becky, which is another research activity out in the international waters, starting to piece together what's happening to our salmon out beyond 200 miles and out in the deep blue ocean. And then finally, I serve on the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, which is a group of bodies that's dealing with fishery disasters right now and trying to conduct research to better understand what's causing some of these fisheries disasters. So I know you guys want to talk a little bit about the ESA petition, so let's just get into that a little bit. Alaska recognizes that we have king salmon stocks that are not meeting our MSY objectives, and MSY is a maximum sustained yield objective. But that doesn't mean that our stocks are at risk of extinction now or in the foreseeable future. And I heard John say that it was a very low bar, and a reasoned person could make the decision based on reading that petition that there was a risk of extinction for these stocks. Well, I consider myself a reasoned person, and I couldn't come to that conclusion, especially given the fact that we had populated the NIMS database, before this petition came in, because we were kind of expecting it with a lot of information to show that, a failure to meet an MSY escapement goal does not mean that a stock is at risk of extinction. We really outlined everything the state is doing to address the declines in MSY and trying to rebuild these stocks to get them back up to providing maximum sustained yield. And we also spent a lot of time talking about the kinds of research that we had in place. So when you look at the petition, which NIMS themselves said has numerous factual errors, omissions, incomplete references, and unsupported assertions and conclusions, and you compare that with the information that we had populated their files with, I guess we were somewhat surprised that a reasonable person, they could conclude that a reasonable person could conclude that we need to just do a 12-month status review on these stocks. That said, we realize where we're at. So now we are, like John said, a member of the status review team. We're not a voting member, but we are going to help NIMS hopefully see the light at the end of the tunnel, that these stocks are well managed, that we're just in a period of low productivity, but not at the end result here is hopefully not to have a listing of these stocks as either threatened or endangered now or in the foreseeable future moving forward. The other thing I want to say is that the low bar is something the state is deeply concerned with, because if this petition can reach that low bar to start a 12-month status review based on their own assertions of what that petition looked like, we're worried that all kinds of petitions could start and spark 12-month status reviews across the state. And we think there needs to be some kind of reasonable sense and reasonable standard as to what kicks off a 12-month status review. And what really gets us a little bit is we provided a status review to NIMS to kick off a petition to kick off a 12-month status review on ring seals, for which there's really no risk of extinction. There's 3 to 7 million of these, and there's no risk of extinction now or in the next 50 years, but that somehow didn't reach that low bar. So we're going to try to work with NIMS to get some kind of reasonable level as to what kicks off these status reviews moving forward. Then I think also I just want to talk a little bit about traditional knowledge. Both the Board of Fisheries and Board of Games have instituted mechanisms to get traditional knowledge into their decision-making. We now have opportunities for tribes and different traditional knowledge holders to come forward to the board outside of the public testimony mechanism to provide input into that board early in the meeting before they actually get into deliberation proposals, to provide that input into the board process. I think that's really a good process. The council has also adopted opportunities for tribal input into their decision process by providing opportunities during public testimony that's unique to that. I think we're recognizing the value of traditional knowledge, and we're trying to incorporate that into it. And then regarding the council appointments, Alaska had 2 of them this time. We appointed one Alaska Native, John Moeller, like John said. He had AFN support. We worked with the Native community to find out who could actually have the information and knowledge on the vast array of fisheries that the council deals with, from halibut to sablefish to crab to salmon to herring and pollock. It's a wide range of issues that they deal with. So we're also working to ensure that we have advisory panel members that are tribal members that are appointed to the the advisory panel, hopefully with the ability for them to gain knowledge. There's a couple of people on there right now that are tribal members that are gaining that knowledge on all these different other fisheries other than salmon that are of interest, because when you get on the council, you not only have to vote on council, you have to, on salmon, you have to vote on all these other kinds of issues that are out there. So we're working towards solving that issue of getting tribal input into the process. So then finally, I think you wanted to talk a little bit about, the role of tribes. In Southeast Alaska, we've done a lot of different things together. Wild Fish Conservancy lawsuit that basically threatened to cut down our troll fisheries. We joined forces. The state took the lead in battling that. The trollers joined us, and you guys formed an amicus brief with us. And together with that, we got our fisheries. We kept our fisheries in the water. We were united in that. I want to thank you all for what you did there, because without that kind of unified support, our fisheries really posed a real chance of being pulled out of the water this summer. But through being united, we got those fisheries moving forward. Fisheries programs. Metlakatla has a really good fisheries program. They have a hatchery. I urge Tlingit Haida to think about a fisheries program into the future, because we're doing things. We're partnering now with Metlakatla on green crabs. We're trying to deal with the issues of king crabs, but you got to have the capacity. So as you build that capacity, we stand ready to partner with you on solving some of these fisheries issues moving forward. Involvement in the Pacific Salmon Treaty process. We have one tribal member already on one of our panels, and I think we're looking to get another person onto those panels. That's a very collaborative process moving forward. So as we reach out and look for tribal members, please, give us names that we can get them involved and appointed into that process and moving forward. With the Board of Fisheries, we appointed Curtis Chamberlain, a Calista member, to the Board of Fisheries, and we have Mart on the Board of Fisheries. We have some very strong tribal advocates now that are pushing for getting tribal voices into the Board of Fish. The MSC process. MSC is something, they basically are treating Alaska at a much higher standard than anybody else in the world, including Russia. And we need to stay united in assuring that our fisheries aren't held to a higher standard. Our fisheries are held to an equitable standard. It's completely unfair that we're held to this thing and our fishermen are to this high standard. Our fishermen are paying the cost, where Russia is basically not held to the same standard, getting way cheaper, sell their products cheaper, and it's just destroying our markets. So we got to stay united in our markets moving forward. And then we got to stay united on this 12-month status review. This is our opportunity to demonstrate together that our fisheries, although they have a slight downturn in productivity, are not at risk of extinction now or in the foreseeable future. And we should, instead of focusing on regulatory oversight that comes with ESA, we should focus on fulfilling those research commitments in that joint salmon research plan that the NOAA and the state of Alaska did and provided to Congress just recently. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciated a lot of your comments, and, the idea of the tribes and the feds and the state working together in unity, again, shows that we can accomplish something, right? And, I appreciate your comments on traditional knowledge. I think that's important, and that really emphasizes for me, if you rely on testimony, most of these boards are set up in a way, mostly for time, but a lot of real good testimony doesn't get to happen. It really doesn't. And so that's why I think when you want that traditional knowledge is being recognized to be very valuable, then we need to get folks put on these boards in every facet. There should be a voice. Alaska again makes up half of the nation's tribes are here in Alaska. You know, we have such a large obligation to our tribal community and our way of life that's based in the Constitution of Alaska. And so, you know, I just want to point those out. To me, it seems that Wild Fish Conservancy's attempts to shut down our hook and line trawler fishermen was just a starting point for their notoriously litigious behaviors and overall objective to shut down mixed stock fisheries. Can you talk about how Fish and Game is responding to this, as well as Alaska is intercepting all of our salmon statements? That narrative that's out there in the universe?
Yeah, so Wild Fish Conservancy is, well, they are well-funded and they are attacking on almost every front that we can see. We got a governor that's very supportive of our fishing industry, and he has approved litigating with the state of Alaska as a lead litigant in most of those lawsuits. So we were the lead litigant in defending our Southeast Alaska troll fisheries in the Wild Fish Conservancy lawsuit. We will continue that. I was just down in San Francisco at the court hearing where the appellate court heard whether or not they were going to leave the stay in place that allowed our fisheries to go to operate this summer, or put it in, immediately halt them. And our court case, and I think NIPS joined, they had a very good court case too, that I think we will prevail in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and have our fisheries moving forward. We stand ready to defend our fisheries. We are confident our fisheries are sustainably managed, but the challenges are great. These groups are out to get our fisheries. Now they're going after our certification for MSC in Southeast Alaska. We have staff that are talking with them as to what it's going to take. But I want to be clear, we will not be held hostage by MSC. We are not going to do things just because they have the power to make us to do it, hold an MSC certification. We're going to do what's necessary and equitable in terms of how other fisheries are getting MSC certification. Then finally, this market consideration. We have to find a way united to fight back with both the Canadian groups and other groups that are saying, don't buy Alaskan salmon. It's unsustainable. Just complete horse crap. And then on another table, we have, at the treaty table, we have groups in Canada in the lower 48 that do believe that we're just a big intercept fishery, and our fishery should be cut to support their fisheries. Well, at the same time, we ask them some very hard questions. What are you doing about your habitat? What are you doing about your water use in those areas? What are you doing about logging in those areas? What are you doing about mining? So I don't think it's fair just to look to Alaska and say, we're going to cut your fisheries to make up for the deficiencies we have in our habitat. We have to start looking at their habitat equally. And to the extent that we do conservation, but it shouldn't all fall on the shoulders of Alaskans.
So unfortunately for us as a tribe, it seems that allocation and market demand drive our fisheries management rather than the prioritization of food security for our residents. As salmon populations decline throughout the region and the productive habitat in our transboundary rivers are industrialized for gold by Canada's mining industry, food fisheries are closed while the trawling industry and charter fishermen continue to have seemingly unlimited access to our fisheries. It seems that the next round of Pacific salmon treaty negotiations will be intense, and that we have an opportunity now to work together to reimagine a treaty that addresses all facets of the salmon life cycle. And we want to let it be known that we see a tremendous need to have tribal seats at not only the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council, but also the Pacific Salmon Commission. What do you see as priorities and opportunities for the state of Alaska and more equity in our fisheries management?
Well, there was a bunch of stuff in that question. So in terms of the Pacific Salmon Treaty, we have to make sure that our fisheries are managed in a way that recognizes the things we're doing for sustainable fisheries management. Because right now our fisheries are managed under what they call the Chinook model. And the Chinook model can be manipulated by different countries in different manners to alter or modify our catch limits. We have to make sure that those catch limits are set on not only model data, but some semblance of what's happening on the landscape on a seasonal basis. one of the successes of Alaska's management program is we manage fisheries in season. And this model is solely based on information from past seasons and projections using modeled outcomes of what might happen in the future. And Alaska really does believe that we should be managing based on some type of assessment of what's happening in season on that run strength. And for instance, last year, our catch limits were artificially low because of this model. But at the end of the season, when they added up all the king salmon, we should have been able to catch 40,000 more fish than we caught. That's just unacceptable. So we need better assessment tools out there. Number two is we need to hold Canada accountable to what's happening in their habitat. That's plain and simple. You just can't look to Alaska to make up those differences. And then the third thing is killer whales. We're being asked to forego harvest to feed killer whales in Puget Sound. When you look at Puget Sound, you look at habitat for killer whales, I can guarantee you it's not fish that Alaskans taking. There's a lot of other threats to those killer whales in Puget Sound, including water quality, cruise ships, trawlers, oil tankers coming in and out. It shouldn't just be the first thing you look at as Alaska's fisheries as a way to solve those issues.
Well, I couldn't agree more with your last statement there. I feel the same way. And, you mentioned trawlers. And so I'll just say, as you know, thousands of Alaskans and the tribes have called upon NOAA and the ADF&G to stop harmful bycatch. And to be clear, in a poll earlier this year, 67% of residents polled supported a ban on trawling in the waters off the coast of Alaska. So what is ADF&G doing to address bycatch?
So let's just take a look at bycatch. So we've done a lot to address bycatch. We've put king salmon bycatch limits in the Bering Sea, and those limits are significant. The actual bycatch is significantly lower than those limits. So 10 years ago, we didn't have limits on bycatch of king salmon. They now have limits. We have 100% observer coverage in the Bering Sea. 10 years ago, we did not have that. We have genetic sampling now to tell where those stocks are coming from. Same thing with chum salmon. Now we're evaluating whether we're going to put a chum salmon bycatch cap limit in place. But we're being very careful with how we do that because we certainly don't want to inadvertently save chum salmon of Russian origin that are being bycaught only to increase the bycatch of Alaskan Chinook salmon. So we're doing it, but we're being careful so we don't have the law of unintended consequences move forward. The next place we need to look at is the Gulf of Alaska. And in the Gulf of Alaska, we have most of our big trawl fisheries with 100% coverage, but some of our smaller fisheries are less than 100% coverage. That would require going into the Gulf of Alaska and rationalizing those fisheries. We're taking a look at that right now. We're trying to decide if that's the right time to do that. You're right, bycatch is something that we need to manage, and it needs to be, but if you completely eliminate bycatch in the Bering Sea, you will significantly hurt coastal Western Alaskan communities because one of the sources of bycatch is the CDQ fishery, and that CDQ fishery is critically important to many coastal communities. So we shouldn't try to equalize pain, but we should try to minimize pain across all those different areas. And that just doesn't mean having zero trawl bycatch, because that bycatch is critically important to the economy of Alaska. But again, we should take steps to reduce it, and I think we are doing that.
I have to ask, is the state of Alaska concerned with non-resident fishing and impacts of fish leaving Alaska?
Well, yeah, we have differential bag limits in Southeast Alaska for residents versus non-residents. I think that's one way you tackle it. You also tackle it through charter, non-charter regulations. The question is, how does it affect sustainability? Certainly, we should not be having fish being shipped out of our state when we're having subsistence closures. So that's one thing we'll be taking a look at closely in the near future. But the charter industry does provide a lot of economic benefits across the state of Alaska. So we have to look at balancing those economic benefits, but where it's impacting subsistence, we have to take steps to protect subsistence.
Well, Commissioner, this one's a hard one for me. I'm from Prince of Wales Island, where we see an enormous amount of charter fishermen. I fly in and out of all of our communities, and I literally see, you can go to the tarmac in Ketchikan, Sitka, or Juneau, and literally see fish boxes, and I'm not even exaggerating, that are piled high and go to the end of the room and back again. And when are these folks going to be treated like commercial fishermen? I mean, I think, they're not sport fishermen.
I think we're getting closer to that because right now we have when we deal with Southeast Alaska next year, we're gonna probably find out we're the tool of differential resident versus non-resident bag limits is gonna be taken away because of under Magnuson, you can't have that. So you're gonna see charter versus non-charter bag limits being the tool of choice to manage that fishery. And I think you will see the board probably provide some kind of a higher benefit to non-chartered anglers in Southeast Alaska.
I really hope so. It really incredibly breaks my heart when I talk to my friends in the interior or Western Alaska who are getting no fish. And yet we see thousands and thousands of boxes a day leave the state. To me, the economic impact being what it is, when people can't feed their families and they can't live in rural Alaska anymore, and I think most people think, well, then they should move to the cities. That would be the death of Alaska. Our rural communities are the lifeblood of Alaska. These are the veins that feed the organs of Alaska. And right now it's appalling. I took pictures the other day and I watched U-Haul vans show up at the airport as I was flying out, full of nothing but fish boxes. And that's not it is a commercial fishery, but it's not being treated like a commercial fishery. So I hope you're right, and I hope that's the direction we go into, because again, that economic impact, again, I watch the jobs and I see the people, and I'm from Prince of Wales. Those jobs aren't local jobs. I would say 70% of them aren't local jobs. Let's do some real metrics on then what the economic impacts are. And you know what, if we see an economic hit, but it's on those that don't even live here, I don't care. I really don't. Now, when it's a family and they live here and they participate in a sustainable fishery, I'm all for that. When I see Alaskans profiting off Alaskan resources and opportunities, I support that. But when we see the kids working on the docks, the charter folks, I mean, they live in places like Idaho and they fly in, work here in the summer, and then go work, winter jobs in places like Idaho. That's the truth. We see them, we talk to them, we live with them. They're not Alaskans.
Well, it sounds like you have some good testimony for the Board of Fish in Ketchikan. The other thing I want to talk a little bit about is in the past, we've closed subsistence fishing when we've not meeting our maximum sustained yield escapement goals. We think that's wrong. And so we're going to be going to the Board of Fish this year and asking for the development of a cultural permit that will allow some degree of cultural harvest to maintain culture and preserve culture in fish camps moving forward, which will allow some type of fishing when we have all other fisheries closed, including sport, commercial, and personal use.
Thank you. Commissioner, my last question, and it's a clarifying question, is the state of Alaska is serving as a party of record for the ESA petition investigation, correct?
We have two or three non-voting members on the task force.
Can you tell me what the process entails?
Well, I think John hit it on the head. Most of the information that's going to be used by NIMS to make this decision is probably sitting in our shop. So this allows for them to have access to that information and our expertise in salmon management to help inform their decision. Again, it's non-voting. We don't get a minority vote or anything, but we can at least provide that information and inform their decisions.
Well, Commissioner.
And we thank them for opening that door, because in the past that hasn't always been open. So thank you, John, for that opportunity.
Again, I just want to thank you for joining us today and being able to have a candid conversation. Thank you. We're going to have another short video before our last speaker.
Our people are the ones that are getting hurt. Everybody thinks that, oh, we're out there to devastate. We're not. We're out there doing what we've done for centuries. Got fish, eat fish. For them to be taking that away, they don't see them taking my culture away.
Great. I'm gonna come around to questions. I was corrected. We were gonna have a Q&A at the end. So I'm gonna go right into the next speaker and we'll come back for questions, Fran. And so I want to introduce online, I believe he's online with us. Will we see him? Justin Parker, who is with the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission out of Washington State.
Hey, can you guys hear me okay and see me okay?
Well, oh, there you are. Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure because I know we've been having some difficulties, so hopefully you can hear me all right. I've never done this on my computer from sitting in the parking lot at a unfortunately a Starbucks here, but they do have Wi-Fi. I made it halfway home, so didn't quite make it there, and I've had some issues with my phone and computer, and I understand you had some glitches. So again, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for the patience, and I guess a quick introduction. As the president said, I'm the Justin Parker. I'm the executive director of the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission, but I'm also a Makah tribal member. Our commission is made up of the 20 Western Washington Treaty tribes that were party to the USV Washington in 1974. We just had our 50th anniversary of that court decision, otherwise known as the Bolt decision. I guess in terms of my history and how I landed here, I grew up fishing, commercial fishing, from the time I was 9 until I got through college at 23. So I grew up on the ocean. I grew up on the Pacific Ocean trolling for kings and silvers in particular, and then ultimately moved in the straits and gill netted for sockeye in large part, and then did a little bit of halibut fishing on a longliner. So we had a combination troller, gill net, longline fishing vessel. So that's my history growing up on the ocean in the summer times. And so I'm serve on several boards. I'm the president of our Salmon Homecoming Alliance here in Western Washington. I'm also on the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians Economic Development Corporation. I serve as the treasurer. And I also sit on the Washington Conservation Action. Just finishing up my term at the end of this year, and I'll be termed out. So several boards, a lot tie into what we're doing here. Even with the Economic Development Corporation, we got a big hook on lending for fishing vessels through our Financial Services Committee. So that just kind of in a nutshell. I grew up in Nia Bay on res, and until I took a job with the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission 24 years ago. July of 2000 is when I moved over to the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission, and just worked the last 8 years I've been serving in this capacity as executive director. So I guess that's a quick introduction of myself, President. And I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Mr. Parker. The Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission was stood up to support the sovereignty of Washington tribes. Can you tell me how your organization functions and interacts with fisheries management in Washington?
Yeah, we are unique in that way. And there are some other intertribal organizations that like I think a Columbia River Intertribal Fish and Wildlife Commission, which was created following USV Oregon, so similar to us, but we're structured a little differently. As are some of the tribes in the Great Lakes. They got 3 intertribal organizations over there, and I really look at us. We are an intertribal organization, and we were basically our folks that came ahead of us, or I want to say ancestors, because a lot of them have passed on now that were here in 1974 after the court decision, formulated the commission. Ultimately, one of the last things President Nixon did was sign a letter to the Appropriations Committee requesting $694,000, I believe it was, after we were formed. And so it was not in his budget, but he did a letter to the committee, and that's what helped form the commission. And we, as I said, we serve the 20 Western Washington Treaty tribes, and I really look at it as we're an extension of the tribes in their natural resources. I know we're called fisheries, but we're a little bit more broader than that, because it started out with salmon, and it went to groundfish, and then shellfish, and then we have a wildlife component, but we also have a environmental protection component that's really come on strong in the past 30 years, I would say. And then that department has grown leaps and bounds. But in a nutshell, the commission, and generally we provide technical and policy support to our member tribes in the management of their treaty reserved rights and the trust resources. So we provide that in form of a program support for fishery planning and management, conservation planning. We also have a fish health support for our tribal hatchery production. Our tribes produce roughly 39 million salmon and steelhead on an annual basis at their hatchery locations and net pens. We also do some fish marking and tagging to support research and management. We also assist tribes in the co-management processes for groundfish, halibut, shellfish, salmon. Some of them were brought up already. Most of them were brought up, and so we work at the international level when it comes to implementing the Pacific Salmon Treaty through the Pacific Salmon Commission. We also do work in the International Pacific Halibut Commission, and we also on the federal level, you guys were talking a lot about North Pacific Fishery Management Council. On the federal level, for us, we're part of the Pacific Fishery Management Council. And then also at the state level, we're involved in the North of Falcon, and our focus is really on that state tribal relation and then discussions that happen around concerns and issues with the state level, state of Washington, that is. So that kind of in a nutshell is what we're about, President.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. Through our working relationship, I've really appreciated your folks' willingness to share with us and mentor us a bit. I just recently, Vice President Rob Sanderson, Vice President Clinton Cook staff, and I met with you folks down in our Linwood office, and we've really appreciated, what you've shared with us and establishing this. As we go through this ESA, can you talk a little bit about what your concerns have been with this process, with the petition, and then it's been frustrating, and I share this with my colleague here from NOAA. We've just felt like this decision-making process involving the 90-day finding on the petition has kind of lacked some transparency. And so we're wondering what your thoughts and advice are on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll get specifically to the petition itself, but in a more general and broader sense, ESA has not gotten us anywhere. The ESA has almost become an impediment of sorts. You don't have any listed stocks up in Alaska, is what I understand. Down here, we got several. And I really go back to 1999 when they listed the Puget Sound Chinook, as well as the Straits of Juan de Fuca, Summer Chum, and Lake Ozette Sockeye. When those got put on the ESA in 1999, we've been going gangbusters down here to turn the tide on that. And as more species have been added, etc., and we're really, a lot of focus tends to be on the fishing aspect, the fishing management, the how much is harvest, etc. But we've been putting a lot of focus on the habitat restoration and habitat protection. So protecting existing habitat, but also focus on restoring through NOAA's Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund, for example. That has doled out $1.8 billion over the past 24 years, I think it's been. So we're doing a lot of good on the habitat restoration efforts. There's a lot of money that was in the BIL, the IRA, et cetera, for that kind of stuff as well. With those budget reconciliation funds that have come down to and become available for states and tribes. But really, ESA, at the end of the day, we got to have all of those meshing together. We have to have the hydro as part of that conversation. And somebody mentioned, the timber industry. That's something we worked with in our state and came up with the Timber Fish and Wildlife Agreement back in 1986, I think it was. And then we worked a lot with the timber industry because of their practices, and they made some changes. Granted, there's still more work to do there, but we've created some relationships. Unfortunately, a lot of that has changed since then. So a lot of these board members are now out of state. Just like I'll use the example of Boeing. We used to have, Billy Frank Jr., our chairman. He had the number to the Boeing. He had the number to Weyerhaeuser Timber Industry, the CEO, et cetera. You know, so we could call and we can meet with those guys. And now it's such a corporate model now, and people from all different states that are part of these corporations. And so it's a little bit harder. We have to do it a little differently. And so that's kind of in a broader sense, but specifically to the petition itself, you know, we feel it definitely lacks sufficient detail to warrant a positive review. They only made really genetic assertions about the potential harm, and listed really general threats to the salmonons that have been occurring coastwide for decades. So that's nothing new. They really confused the missing MSY. You know, you've heard that by the previous speaker, MSY, quite a bit, just before he turned over to me here. But they really confused MSY target and escapement goals with chronically having escapement levels below a critical abundance threshold that may cause the genetic drift. NOAA, you know, you noted the problems with the petition, but then stated that they also reviewed their files and data and had concerns that warrant the positive decision to move forward. The documents that are in their file and the data supported this decision. You know, that's one of the key questions we had. We submitted a letter to NOAA last week because we would like to know exactly what that is. What is the source of this concern? And I think this is especially important since earlier in the year that NOAA reported to Congress that the Gulf of Alaska Chinook were not overfished, are currently subject to overfishing. So if we're saying one thing to Congress, but then within months turn around and move forward with something like this, you know, that's a big problem. And it creates a problem for us, and I say our tribes and even us as a commission, because we then have to divert resources and we just don't have that capacity to drop what we're doing to interject and review, provide, you know, do an analysis of what was submitted and how NOAA decided to move forward. So that is a big problem for us as tribes anytime these get accepted. And again, you know, moving something the ESA does not necessarily turn the tide. So, and I think this, you know, this is important to us as you know, when I talk about the overfishing and the overfishing thresholds that were, you know, again, that was brought up by the gentleman. I think it was the two speakers ago about the Magnuson-Stevens Act. Well, unfortunately, the Magnuson-Stevens Act expired over 10 years ago. You know, we've been involved in Representative Jared Hoffman's field hearings. I provided testimony on that. We provide testimony to Congress back in DC on this, some of our individual tribes and us collectively in written testimony. And unfortunately, that authorization expired. I think it was back in 2013 or something like that. But the thresholds that were established in the MSA, you know, their function as more of a safety net to keep stocks from becoming threatened or endangered. But these thresholds are used by our state and tribes in Oregon and Washington to develop recovery plans for stocks that trigger them. And so at the end of the day, you know, why we're not holding Alaska to the same standard that what we do down in the lower 48? So anyway, that's obviously a big concern for us, and we're looking for some answers on that response. So I'll just leave it at that, President.
Thank you. Understanding that Alaska Native tribes do not have treaty protections, what recommendations do you have for Alaska tribes to execute our sovereign rights for food security and resource stewardship?
Oh boy, I would say tell your story. You know, you follow the Billy way, Billy Frank Jr. For those that aren't aware, Billy Frank Jr. was our longtime chairman at the commission for 35 plus years. And his mantra was always tell your story. In fact, we got a bill that was named Billy Frank Jr. Tell Your Story. And then Billy is, you know, for those that never met him, you know, you could disagree with him. You could have a debate, you know, at the end of the day, but you're still walking out there, even though things may have not went well during the meeting. You walk out and he'll give you a hug. And, you know, he was the diplomat that I've never seen anyone quite like that. And that's quite frankly why his statue's going to National Statuary Hall next spring. So he'll be one of the 2 statues representing the state of Washington. So we will have an indigenous person in the National Statuary Hall. But he always talked about telling your story. We speak for those that can't speak for themselves. We talk about the animals, the fish, the mammals, the birds, etc. We got to do what we can to tell our story and the resource stewardship and reliance of these stocks that we have for food security, because we're just like you guys up in Alaska, we're all about harvest. As long as it's making the conservation necessity, we're all about harvest. We're all about harvesting our fish, our shellfish, our ground fish, our animals, our deer, elk, bear, etc. You name it. And so as long as the numbers are there that allow it, that's ultimately what we want to do at the end of the day. So it's really just about telling your story, why it's really necessary, and especially when you have such a big need for it with the costs. I mean, I was just up there visiting Yukon River and Kuskokwim River a year ago. For the first time our 3 commissions got together up in Bethel, and it's really a subsistence lifestyle up there. And then you go to the stores and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe the prices on things up there. And so, when you don't have that much of monetary, you got to fall back on what we were taught, what our way of life is, and what you rely on. We went through that even out at my tribe at Macaw, and when COVID hit and we couldn't have on our bigger boats, we couldn't have fishers from different families, different households fishing. So we had to change our regulations because of the COVID spread, that it was tied to your household. That was, an unfortunate situation. We had to prolong our halibut fishery, but that food scarcity was such a big deal during that time. And I mean, it still is. People, we still rely on that. And really we need to advocate for the prioritization of meeting that subsistence needs for our rural communities. And so I'll just leave it at that, President.
Thank you so much, Justin. I appreciate you joining us today and providing that context. As we near the end, I'd like to turn to our audience for questions and thank our panelists for sticking around and answering any comments or questions. And I know Fran Houston, our elder from here in Juneau, Aquan, if you have a comment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President and the panel. Thank you for being here. I was expecting a lot more people to be here and a little bit disappointed that there wasn't enough people here. I think if it was advertised a little bit more, there would have been a lot more people here to be able to speak on what was on their mind. But I am glad to be here. I am Fran Houston. My Tlingit name is Sekuni, Raven Moiety, Clinadi, which is the Dog Salmon clan, from the Yaktahit, which is the Big Dipper House. And we were the first indigenous people of this area. I am a daughter of a fisherman. He ran a seiner, and he fished from the time he was little, all the way up until he was able to captain his own fishing boat. And I do recall the alert that he had, and the other one was the Ocean Queen. And he fished all his life. And when they went to switch to limited entry, he told me, he shook his head, and he had said, big mistake, because what's going to happen, everything's going to go sideways, it's going to go upside down. And that's what happened. So my father, Leo Houston, he's from Huna. And I'm seeing on these videos, I see my cousin being on there, Frank Wright. He's a fisherman, so is his father. So I have a few questions. I was listening to what know what you folks have said, and President Peterson, what you had shared. And I just have a problem with what is the problem that's causing king salmon to be on the endangered species? It's telling me that it's not really controlled. It's getting out of hand. And I heard President Peterson talk about these boxes of fish going on Alaska Airlines. I lived in Sitka for 11 years, and they had crates of boxes of fish taken off. And I couldn't count them. They were stacked high. I probably would say 5 or 6 boxes high on this crate that would go on a cargo plane. That's a lot. I wouldn't mind having one myself. It would last me for the year because I can't go out, go fishing. I miss my fish. And is the problem, is anything being done as far as what's causing this problem? Like, are our waters being polluted? Are the ships damaging our waters, damaging our sea life? Mining, that too causes problems. This is a big concern. And it's, I'm really concerned about that. I I used to be able to go out Outer Point and fish off the rocks. I can't do it no more because my knees won't let me. And I miss that. So it's a big concern. It was our way of life. I heard stories from my grandmother talking about how things were managed back in the days. It was managed. Our people managed. They had their own way of managing the fish. They only took what was needed, not the way it's being needed right now of somebody getting rich. It's it doesn't make sense. So I don't know if I'm out of line, but I just wanted to state my feelings. And yeah, this did touch base with me because of what my father tried to fight for back in the day. He died at an early life in his mid-50s, but he was fighting at that time for limited entry. And he did his best. And so I just wanted to know if these things are being looked at that's hurting all of us, including our waters. So thank you very, very much for allowing me to speak. And I would like to see more of these happen and have people voice their opinion. We have a voice. We can speak. Gunashish. Thank you.
Gunashish, how friend. I don't know if anybody wants to speak.
Maybe I'll say something. You know, I wish it was one thing that was happening to our king salmon. I really do, because as I said, in the Bering Sea, you know, when we had the chum salmon crisis in the Yukon, I wish it was bycatch, because I could solve bycatch. But we were missing 1.5 million chum salmon that year, and bycatch was maybe 20, 30,000. It just wasn't one thing that's causing these things in the ocean. Something is fundamentally changing in the ocean. What is it? We're starting to explore it. We put together research programs now in the inside waters in that first month and a half, 2 months out at sea to start piecing it together. We're finding out that survival rates of king salmon are critically important in that first month and a half out at sea. We're doing that with NOAA. We're trying to look at what's causing those problems. But once they get out in the ocean, king salmon are the species that live the longest out in the ocean and spend more of their time out there. And what we're finding out in general is that these fish are coming back smaller and younger at age, which is all pointing to the fact that when you don't spend as much time out there in an area that has typically has had a lot of food, when you come back smaller and younger, there's something that's driving you into freshwater earlier than you want to be. So we have to start piecing it together, but a lot of that answers are going to come not quickly enough for people who want to have answers. You want to have answers right now. So in the meantime, we're taking the actions we can, but we're still going to go out and look in that ocean to figure out what's happening and why these salmon are coming back smaller and younger. But unfortunately, it's not going to be a quick answer.
Thank you. Joseph?
Mr. President, Idat kach toas gutsa chayek wat in chakwatania, ya hasan get yuk atangi tunach, ya de hosikutati daya kushus gahayu atangi koa, kunakoa yak e kokyak kwati koa, ye wachtu ye yagao. I won't translate what I said because I think that it should be about time that we start to understand our languages. But I want to speak to a little bit that has not been touched on, and that's on our religious rights when it comes to our food, ha'chaya. It's part of ha'kustiyi, our way of living. One of the things that happens during ku'ik, let's say that it becomes an endangered species, and I understand that we're able to still, as Tlingit people, still go out and gather even if it is an endangered species, that we're still able to go and do our subsistence livelihood. But some of the issues that come up is that we're limited a number of things that we can get up to such a point. During this time that we're coming into is during Ku'ik season. Ku'ik, I can tell you that my family right now, they're getting ready for all the ku'iks this season, meaning that they're getting ready for all of these parties that are going to be going on. We need to gather a lot of things, a lot of berries, a lot of fish. And one of the things that happens during ku'ik is kansatikhi. A kansatikhi is a plate that you put on, you put a bunch of the people's food, their favorite food, and you put it in a fire, and you say all of the past people's names, and then you burn it. When you burn it in Tlingit Tundatani, in our way of thinking, we are eating with our ancestors. If the endangered species, if we don't have our food, you guys are making our ancestors starve. You're starving them. And they've already suffered long enough. So these are things that we have to think about too, is our religious rights to our food. So thank you.
I think that's Joseph, you really encapsulated something that's been almost unspoken. We often talk about our way of life, and for folks who don't understand that, we're actually talking about our religion. We're talking about who we are at our core. And we have these beliefs that have been passed down to us for thousands of years. And these practices are so very important, much like, we go to church on Sunday, but our way of life is 24/7. It's every day, all day. And I think that's something that just isn't encapsulated in such a way. Sorry, I get a little emotional. When we can't feed ourselves, we can't feed our ancestors. And our ancestors and our beliefs made every sacrifice for us to be here today. And it's that time when what Joseph's referring to, our ku'ik, you hear the term party, but it's the ku'ik. And that's when we come together and we hold, we honor those who have passed. It's when our opposites hold each other up, and we take that time to acknowledge, and that's a sacred time. It's a sacred act. It's one that happens many, many times in this very room. And it's very serious to us. So I want to say for those words, Commissioner.
I'd like to touch on this one too, because we just recently signed an agreement with Canada to rebuild Canadian origin Chinook salmon. And in that agreement, both sides of the border agreed to stop all commercial, sport, personal use fishing and really directed subsistence fishing for numbers of fish that would be harvested for food purposes. But both sides of the border recognize this very issue. We can't kill culture and we can't destroy culture while we're rebuilding these stocks. So both sides of the border agreed, both governments agreed that we're going to provide some cultural opportunity to allow some fish while we're rebuilding these runs to be put into culture camps, to be harvested, to pass on that culture. Because if it takes 10 years to rebuild these stocks and you get to a point where they're rebuilt, but the culture is destroyed, what do you have left? You have to preserve that culture while you're rebuilding.
Well, I'm not going to try to, well, maybe I will be snarky, but I hope that the fishing game then applies that to moose and other things. Because 3 years ago, there was an ugly lawsuit over just this. And a community had to go to court for a moose. And that's just wrong. And I have to say that. And so I'm glad to hear you say the words you say, but it has to apply to all of the animals because they're all important to us. Are there any other last questions or comments in the back?
Hey, Mr. President.
Oh, yes.
Mr. President, can I also add a little bit to that as well?
Yes, good.
So yeah, thanks for the comments out there in the crowd. I appreciate it. And you know, the reason why I'm in a parking lot at a Starbucks halfway between home and where I was, I'm coming from a funeral, so this was not planned. Wasn't planned that I'd be out and about today. Management staff meeting at the office this morning, left the office, ran out to Port Gamble Sklallam Tribe, had a service for an elder, friend of the family. And, you know, getting to the point of, you know, we talk about, you know, when I talk about our tribes, it's always about the tribe's treaty reserved rights, correct? But the agencies, or federal agencies in particular, have that trust responsibility to the tribes. So regardless of not having treaty rights, we all have tribal rights. And the points that are being brought up here today in the crowd are all good points, all valid. You know, but with us being place-based and having those adjudicated treaty rights, we cannot just up and move if our resources are low or there's nothing there. I can't just go from Macaw down to the Columbia River if we don't have any salmon. I can't just move into the South Sound and start harvesting clams, for example, or oysters, you know, or shellfish if we don't have anything out on the coast. So we're place-based. We can't move around like a Washington citizen can. They can move all over the place. Eastern Washington, Western Washington, Columbia River, Straits of Juan de Fuca, Pacific Ocean. And so, you know, I was just thinking about that because, you know, we're talking about the religious, and obviously we had a funeral service, a lot of religious aspect to it, the cultural part of it as well, you know, our traditional way of life. And what we do in these type of situations is that we feed the guests. And they had crab, clam, oysters, and I get it. Shellfish is we're in an okay space when it comes to the shellfish. But it just dawned on me, where did they get that salmon from? My guess is they didn't harvest that salmon because they really don't have much of a salmon fishery anymore. So they probably had to go buy it from the tribe up in the North Sound or even the Columbia River tribes from the Columbia River. And so our salmon is depleted so drastically over the years. And again, we can't look at it from a harvest standpoint. Our harvest has declined in so many of our watersheds by 80 to 90%. You can't go there anymore from a harvest standpoint. But at the end of the day, us with the state of Washington as co-managers of the resource, you know, the bold decision basically decided 50-50. We will split the resources of salmon return to Washington waters, et cetera. Of course, we got the Pacific Salmon Treaty and how we balance that act, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it's really finding that balancing act between what's needed out in the ocean, what's needed in sound, ultimately to the terminal area. And that's just finding that balance. Without that balance, you're going to continue to have these problems. And we got to make sure that folks in the terminal areas are having just as much opportunity as those out front, if you will. My tribe fishes out front because that's where we're located. But we also got to find that balance because, can't get out too much in front of it. So we got to find that balance. We have disagreements intertribally, just as we do with the state of Washington, et cetera, but we work it through. Sometimes it gets a little testy, it gets a little difficult and almost falls apart. But at the end of the day, we come up with an agreement. And when we negotiate, we want to negotiate so it's a win-win situation. So sometimes people get in their mind that it's win or nothing at all. And so you end up having winners and losers when you do that. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out because of the difficulties that we experience down here. There's some similarities, some nuances, but there's definitely a lot of similarities and why we work with Tlingit and Haida, why we work with the Kuskokwim, why we work with the Yukon, et cetera. So thank you.
Thank you, Justin. As we're nearing the end, I'm going to take the last two questions. Kelly?
Hi, my name is Kelly Moneymaker. I am a social justice and climate justice filmmaker. And I've traveled all over and worked with the Tokelauans, Samoans, Maori, and now I'm back home in Alaska to work with our peoples. And the one thing I can say is we're trying to focus on indigenous economy. That's what this film is about. And my experience all over the place is people can't eat money. They can eat food. And I want to know why governments don't put subsistence first. You're saying to give cultural licenses to preserve culture and to make sure fish camps can function, but people need to eat. And so why isn't that first and then commercial and then sports fishing? Why can't we feed Alaska first? That's my question. Thank you. Yes, please, Commissioner.
So Alaska has a subsistence priority. We do close other fisheries before we close subsistence. I think the question comes down to is when we have subsistence closed, how far out do you go to close other fisheries? Do you close trawling completely if subsistence is closed in a river, or do you close an intercept fishery completely? Those are questions that we're struggling with right now, to be quite honest with you. For instance, would we have closed the trawl industry in the Bering Sea, over 20,000 potential Yukon River chum salmon, when we were missing 1.8 million? We are looking for ways to provide subsistence opportunity, but we have to provide that opportunity in a way where we're protecting other stocks like king salmon in the Yukon River. So traditional ways of fishing with gill nets may not be the opportunity you have for fishing chum salmon until we rebuild those king salmon runs. So yeah, we are looking for ways to provide subsistence as a priority in the state of Alaska, not only for cultural purposes, but for food security purposes.
Last question.
Hi there, my name is Jason Gordon. I'm a tribal citizen. I was born and raised here in Juneau, Alaska for the last 20 years. I am from the Eagle Nest House of Sitka. And I just wanted to ask the President Peterson a question regarding the meeting that you had with the, let me see, with the other tribal members. I wanted to see if you also reached out to the ones down or organizations down in Washington and Oregon that have been affected by the WFC and their petitions such as this, and seeing if NOAA has compared analytical data from Oregon and Washington to kind of compare and contrast and see how we can work and also learn from how they handled their situation and how that unfolded for them.
So yes, that was exactly why we met with Justin's group down there in Washington, is they represent the tribes that are dealing with these lawsuits. And quite honestly, it's one of the reasons for my continued disdain for the Wild Fish Conservancy is that they've really targeted tribes. Over 70 lawsuits, am I correct, Justin, to Washington-based tribes by this group?
Oh, boy, apologize. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. So you probably know more than I do in that in that respect. So apologize for not having that one.
But it's important for us as indigenous leaders, as tribes, to build a bridge to each other. We have differences, we just like we do with the state, just like we do with the federal government. But it's that collective knowledge and working together where we find the solutions. And I said it at the beginning of this: we're at war. We're having war declared on our way of life. And as a people here in Alaska, are the first people, our way of life has been criminalized really since statehood. And we navigate those waters and we work to build relationships. And sometimes that's hard work, but we have to lean into it, because if we don't, our people continue to be criminalized. I can sit here and tell stories all day about, growing up in the village and having, people wanting to criminalize us when you're one fish over. I mean, trawlers are allowed 20,000 of one species but if me as a subsistence user goes and gets one fish over, I could be fined, I could lose my boat, I could lose my seine. Where's the equity in that? Right? So we have to work and we have to build these relationships so that we can continue to thrive like our people have for thousands of years here. And that's why we do this work. That's why we sit on a panel like this today. And, we have the tough conversations, but we lean into it. And I want to thank the folks here on this panel because they've leaned in, they've leaned back, and I appreciate that. I appreciate having an honest conversation. Hey, it might rub you a little wrong. You might rub me a little wrong, but at the end of the day, we still have to lean into the work and we have to unite together because I'm seeing it. I see, and I appreciate Justin traveling up there. I have too. And those are our relatives and we care about them, and they don't get fish. And that's not right. And that's what's up next for us. And especially if the Wild Fish Conservancy is successful, which I believe they won't be, but what happened? Nobody has said this tonight. What happens if they are successful? Because we're going to be limited on everything else because of habitat. Wherever a king salmon goes, wherever habitat they return to, that means we'll be susceptible to not being able to catch other species of fish. Am I right? If they were successful? Please.
One mic will do the trick. Not automatically. If Wild Fish Conservancy were to get what they want, which presumably is to list Chinook throughout the Gulf of Alaska as endangered, that doesn't automatically restrict any human activities. Somebody alluded to the exemption under the Endangered Species Act to allow for continued subsistence use. So that is there. We would, if we were to get to that point, we would need to look very closely at the specific facts of what are the threats to the species that make it qualify for endangered status, if that were the case, and then what measures are needed to address those threats. So it would not be automatic that it would shut down harvest of either the target species, Chinook in this case, and associated species. We'd have to look at the particulars.
Commissioner?
Yeah, I would like to add to that a little bit because I think it's a little broader than that. Anything that potentially takes a Chinook salmon would be under federal regulatory oversight. So if you're fishing sockeye with a seine boat and you incidentally harvest Chinook salmon, you're now going to be under incidental take permits under the federal government. If you harvesting chum or pink salmon in a gill net fishery or something, you're going to be, and you have a potential of harvesting a Chinook salmon that's listed, you're going to be under an incidental take permit. This is not insignificant. And unfortunately, Alaska's experience with this, and I think you can hear it in the tribe's voices in lower 48, the easiest thing to look at is harvest. That's the first thing people look at. And then they look at other things like habitat and other things, but really harvest is the number one thing that is often regulated under an ESA listing. So, and it's not just directed Chinook fisheries again, it's anything that incidentally harvests them that would be under federal regulatory oversight. So it would be a significant change if it happened.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank the panel for joining us tonight. And for those of you, I know we competed with some beautiful weather out there today, and we made up by really making it freezing in here. So thanks for joining. And just the last thing I want to say, and I'm again very upfront and unapologetic about my stance with Wild Fish Conservancy. If they had legitimate concerns about the king salmon, they would be going after the issues and looking into the impacts. What is impacting king salmon? They're not, and they've targeted us and our fisheries as the only conspirator towards this, and that's just not accurate. And they've been using faulty science. They do just enough to create the lawsuit. That's it. And again, my colleagues here can't say that. I can, and I will. And I'll say it to their face. I'll say it in the news. I don't care, because they're there causing chaos for our way of life. And we have to stand up against that. So thank you for joining us tonight. And for those of you who may have a question and didn't get to, I'm sure our panel will be happy to talk to you on the side. Thank you all and have a good night.
Thank you very much.